Hello and welcome to the Temple of the Silver Stars public class series, Selections from Magick Without Tears. My name is Ruth and with me is Rex, my co-host for this class series. We are both academic track instructors with the Temple of the Silver Star. We are a nonprofit thelemic organization, Temple of the Silver Star, that's been around about 12 years, and we provide two tracks of training, the academic, which is sort of what you're seeing that side of here, and the initiatory. Both tracks were designed to provide preparatory training in ceremonial magic, Raja Yoga, Kabbalah, tarot, astrology, and much, much more. Using these foundational tools, we seek to guide the student toward a deeper apprehension of true will, the law of Thelema, and his or her own psycho-spiritual constitution. So you can visit our website, TOTSS.org, to learn more about joining the academic track or being an initiate. And we have academic campuses sort of all over the world. I'm in Los Angeles. Rex has a public study group that he runs out of Seattle. So, wherever you're located, you might be near one. You never know. So just visit our website for more information. And Rex and I are co-hosting a series of weekly classes this winter. And we're going to be discussing Aleister Crowley's Magick Without Tears. And tonight we'll be discussing chapter 23, Improvising a Temple. And you can read that for free on hermetic.com. And I think I've posted the link earlier, but I'll post it now just in case. Never know if Zoom keeps these for everyone. Cool. So yeah, this chapter, I was hoping it would be a little bit more instructive, seeing as we're all kind of stuck at home. Maybe we have some shared temple spaces often, but sometimes, you have to have one in your house, or it's nice to have one in your house. So I was hoping this would give us some guidance on that. And it does a little bit, and it doesn't. And then it goes off and gives some advice to people who are newly acquiring magical items and setting up magical spaces. So, it's sort of a typical Crowley, sets you up for one thing and takes you off in another direction, I think. Rex, what would you have to say?
Yeah, I think that pretty much that describes it pretty well. I think that it's a good time for people to, if you don't have a temple at home, or if you're having to improvise a temple, I think it's a great time to think about that sort of thing. I think that Crowley makes some attempt here in his descriptions. I felt like, in some ways he was just basically saying, if you're going to improvise a temple, do what I say in book 4. And
yeah, exactly. I pulled out my book 4. So if you guys aren't familiar with Crowley's work, this is called the Big Blue Brick, or Magick ABA book 4. It's also all on hermetic.com if you don't want to buy it. But he does have, and he references it in this chapter. He says, well, if you can find my book, which, at the time it wasn't really in print because it's huge and expensive. But he has a whole chapter, or several chapters, a whole section on setting up a temple, and he references it. So if you can get a hold of it, this is kind of what he's talking about. You see there is the circle diagram that he references, and he says, I'll make you a copy. That's what you would want. So if you don't have access to it, it's all on I'll post the link on hermetic.com, and it's really great because it actually does tell you how to set up a temple.
Yeah, and there's no doubt. I mean, that's it is good instruction from that standpoint. I think that as the notes, I think there was a note at one point where it described the circle needing to be 30 plus feet in diameter, and that's bigger than most people's living rooms, I think. And I mean,
it's not really DIY.
not really, unless you have that kind of space. But it's like for myself, I have my altar in my bedroom, and so it's not really that's my improvised space. And so I think we have different ideas of what improvising is in different situations. But I did like how Crowley went into some detail, a small amount of detail, about he improvised some things when he was in the desert, which I think is a good example of how you would need to improvise if you're doing magic ritual outside of your normal space, or if you're on a traveling situation, in a hotel room, for example.
Yeah, he even talks about mountaineering, he's like, well, I set up these stones for my altar and for my circle. And, that kind of, he did really travel quite a bit in his life. He was a famous for mountaineering and climbing mountains. And, I think he went to Mexico and New York and did all this camping and stuff. So
Yeah, I
it's
can
cool.
imagine all the scrying of the aethers that they did, as they were going through, traveling around through Mexico and Nepal, I think, or no, not Nepal, but through North Africa. And I'm sure they were improvising all kinds of stuff there, but he doesn't go into a lot of detail there.
Yeah, it's funny reading through it. So, he talks about just, well, if you're lucky enough to have a house and you can set up a room, it should be a room that doesn't have anything else in it. And it should be really like neat and tidy. And, he kind of talks a little bit about how the room and the circle are kind of like an outer projection of your inner world. And as a magician, especially as someone who's practicing like uh, Kabbalah and being a Kabbalist, you want to have the order of the Kabbalah like represented in your mind and that represented into the world. I sort of was like, oh yeah, that's what we're doing. We're making order of the physical world to match like the inner order of our minds. So I was like, oh, that's good advice. Obviously, don't bring weird stuff into your temple that you don't want into your inner world, because it is a reflection of that. But then, when you're traveling, it's like maybe anything goes. You kind of can't help it. I don't know. I always think of, the human imagination as really like such a powerful tool as well, in the astral world and building these things like, the human mind, it's like we perceive things and we think they're real, but the only way we have to definitely know something is what is real is to feel and touch it, and sometimes our senses lie. So it's just this, it's funny to think about like what is the human mind and how is it constructing your universe, and how can that be a magical temple,
Mm-hmm.
I guess
Well,
that's
and the temple is kind of a reflection of ourselves and our universe in that way. So so much of magic comes down to intent as well. So I think that's where the idea of improvising things, you can cut corners when you're improvising because your sense of intent to achieve the magical goal is going to make up the difference there.
Yeah, the thing I love about Lon-Milo Duquette, I don't know if anyone's familiar with his work. If you're not, get on board. He's amazing. But his, I think it's his book on Enochian scrying. He literally just tells you, hey, make a copy of this little like diagram I have of the scrying ring, that has all these symbols on it, and just cut it out of paper and then put it on your finger and with tape, and that's your ring. And he tells you like just be creative with what you have, because sometimes you're not going to be able to have a solid gold ring cast out of like from the angels, and that's the kind of thing that you're practicing and exercising is your imagination. It's a really important skill to have, like often doing rituals during meditation in your mind and saying, okay, now I'm going to imagine that I'm doing resh, and I'm in my astral body. It's really important to practice those things too. Once you get the physical down, moving yourself into like a more astral space, which is all improvised, it's all imagination, I think is a really important skill for a magician to have. So we're just getting off. So Kristen says, instead of drawing the circle on the floor, can someone make a circle with a cloth and have the drawing on it and just fold it and put it away when it isn't being used? And Steven says, I've used a circle like you're describing, Kristen, and I found it effective. Yeah, so totally. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard of a lot of different ways of improvising a circle, using rope, using cloth, or using whatever's at hand, honestly. And I mean, I guess if it comes down to it, you can just draw it and have it be there astrally if you need to. But yeah, certainly using a cloth circle and that's a nice way to have like a go-to, like a go bag, like a magical go bag, where you can just travel.
I like that, a magical go bag. I mean, it sounds like Crowley had one. Oh, Stephen's posting a link to a place you can get circles from.
There we go.
Yeah,
Nice.
so Crowley's like, you need a circle, and then he wanted you to paint the diagram on the floor, and then you know, you need the altar. So the altar is another important part. If you do have a space where you can kind of keep it, you know, a little bit private. He also talks about like the accumulation of energy. You know, if you're in a room and you're practicing magic and that's kind of like the main thing that you use it for, it tends to really build up like an energetic sense of whatever you're doing. I really noticed that, you know, if you go into a Masonic hall, it kind of has this like cool sort of sense of like timeless ages. And I don't know, I've practiced rituals in rooms and people have entered and been like, I feel weird in here. I don't know, Rex, if you have any experience with that sort of.
Yeah, actually, I was able to, you know, the Eastern Star Temple that's on L Street in Sacramento. It's a huge space, and they've got 2 different ritual rooms that they're set out like the Masonic style. And there was one as we crossed the threshold into their larger Masonic, or you know, the larger room. It was like the sound just completely stopped. It was just like dead silent. And I don't know, they must have had the walls, you know, specially done so that it was like dampening the sound and stuff, but it was just like completely silent. And you'd step out into the hallway and it was totally ambient, normal sound. And that was remarkable. I'm not sure what they did there, but it was cool.
Yeah, I mean, the Masons are sort of known, you know, the architects,
Yeah.
architecture. And it's funny because I always think of, you know, Paul Foster Case named his order BOTA, which is Builders of the Adytum. And an adytum is like a temple. So, you know, it's like there is a lot of that metaphorical building of a temple, which is like physical, but then actually like spiritual too, to keep in mind as you progress. And then, yeah, just it's funny, like when you're saying the magical go bag, it's funny because Crowley talks about his little kit. He has a wand, an 8-inch wand that has precious stones representing the tree of life and an iron tube containing quicksilver. I've never used one of those. And then a cup and a satchel of rose petals and yellow silk to represent air, and another in green silk packed with salt to represent earth. So if anyone's looking to make a camping trip, there's some suggestions to pack along.
Yeah, I thought those were pretty good examples, I think, of, you know, improvising for different elements. And I think you can probably think of other examples. I know once I had to improvise for air, and I used a turkey feather that, you know, there's turkeys running around all around Sacramento, and a friend of ours had given us a bunch of turkey feathers, and I used them during a ritual as a representation of air. And it was nice. It worked well.
Yeah, sometimes it's like when you find something that's just in the space already, it kind of has this cool, like synchronistic, spontaneous quality to it that like maybe I should use this. Maybe there's something it'll really add to the ritual. So, you know, that's kind of fun. Kristen is asking, Quicksilver sounds dangerous. Is that mercury? Yeah. Yes. I feel like, you know, there was a time in history where mercury poisoning wasn't really like, people weren't conscious of it. I have friends who said when they were kids they would play with like broken thermometers, and yes, don't play with mercury. It'll poison you through the skin. But yes, I suppose Crowley, he didn't have to get through TSA, so he could travel with his Quicksilver wand. So yeah, and then he brings up another point. The first point is banishing. Everything needs to be removed from the room, which is not necessary for the work. You know, and that is really, I think, for me, one of the most important parts about any sort of like temple space or space I'm working in is doing the LBRP, the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram first. And you should be doing that daily. It's funny because it's like, it has this idea of like, oh, I'm cleansing a space. But to me, I'm always feel like I'm cleansing myself too. It's kind of like taking a shower magically when you do the LBRP. And so just for people that don't know, that that's when you start off with, and you draw from the earth point onto pentagram up to spirit, and so you're drawing sort of the earth to up into the spirit and getting rid of it. Does that make sense, Rex? As I'm describing.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's that's standard banishing technique. But yeah, and if you're going to have a temple space, no matter where it is, I think you're going to want to have a place like that, and banish it out properly before you start any kind of working.
Yeah, and you'll want to do that a lot before you do like any crazy invocations. Just banish every day, all the time. That's kind of what I said. It's funny because I've sort of like, as the pandemic's worn on, I've gotten into like different magical sort of groups online where people are just discussing and trying things out. And I've had one person be like, oh, I did the LBRP and then, my son saw something vanish into the wall. What was that? I'm scared. And I'm like, well, you just did a banishing ritual. Like, you probably, if there's a spirit in your house, you might have chased them out. So just keep in mind, like, what you're doing, if you think it's real, you are chasing out whatever's in the room. So, that it's like saging. I think of it kind of like as saging a house, might have some repercussions, unexpected. So
yeah, it kind of resets the energy is the basic take, is my basic take on it. And if you're doing a banishing on a daily basis, it is like hygiene.
Yeah, and Crowley even points that out, sort of in the second half. So yeah, I mean, like I would say, read through this letter, and there's one thing that he does say in this. I mean, I go to like book 4, of course, but he says that you should set up the stele of revealing and make it your kibba.
Oh, the Qibla. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was funny because I know that Magical East is Magical East, but he's referencing it as the person should like set it towards like
North.
Boleskin.
Well, yeah, I think that's you don't have to do that. I mean, I think establishing Temple East is the main thing. I think that a lot of times in a thelemic context, Temple East is traditionally pointed towards Boleskin house, which I think for most of us would be in more of a northern, here in the U.S. at least, it would be kind of in a northern direction, kind of up over the planet. It's the quickest direction to Scotland. But I think that's just that's kind of been since Boleskin House at one point was viewed as the Mecca, or that's where Crowley did his Abramelin working. So it holds.
Yeah, that's literally how he describes it. It's like,
mm-hmm.
like when it, like if you're a Muslim, you would face east to the building of Mecca.
Right.
This is like Crowley's like, you should do this to Boleskine, which is kind of funny. Boleskine's in Scotland. I'm probably mispronouncing it. I'm not.
I think that's right.
Boleskine. But he's telling the person he's writing the letter to, they're located in Plymouth, which I believe Plymouth, England is like in the southwest version, to just like it's directly north of you. So that's a little factoid, a little weird thing in there that might be confusing. But the stele of revealing is something also that's referenced in the Book of the Law, that you should have like a copy of it for your temple. So if you're setting up a thelemic temple, the stele of revealing is key to have that as a source of magical energy and inspiration. Yeah, and then there's a few other things, that he talks about that are kind of a little unique. The silver oil lamp hung from the ceiling exactly above the center of the altar. And in book 4, he kind of goes over the meaning of that. It's sort of like a reference to AA and the lantern. Let's see. The sword, the disc, and also like in the book 4, he goes over like sort of the meanings of these kabbalistically. Like the disc, he says, is like Malka, the bride, like Malkuth, and the sword is sort of the ruach on the tree of life that sort of is the sun, and then the cup is Binah, and the wand is Hokmah. So these have like a Kabbalistic meaning that you bring into your temple.
Yeah, I would recommend anybody who hasn't read those chapters in book 4 to take the time to read each of the chapters that he lays out on those weapons, because they really do. It's a big reveal on a lot of the symbolism that Crowley puts into all these things, and just in just Western magic in general. A lot of the correspondence is there, and a lot of these weapons are just like the temple. They're reflections of ourselves, of our psyche, of our our those elemental forces within ourselves. They're outward reflections of those, and so it's important that those weapons have those meanings as well for us as we're doing magic.
Yeah, and then he also talks a little bit about the robes. A lot of this is kind of like the robe of your grade if you're in the AA. Kristen is asking, did he suggest a cup with an apple design if a silver one couldn't be found? I think he just means like the apple shape is kind of one of the more desirable shapes. I'm not exactly sure if it has to look exactly like an apple, or maybe that's the size, but it should be silver. Silver is kind of like an important material to have.
Yeah, I think it was the shape that he was going for there. I think he's describing it as an apple, kind of a rounded shape. And if you look at if you've seen pictures of some of the AA weapons, that cup is kind of a round, not a bowl really, but the cup itself has kind of a rounded body.
Almost like a goblet.
But if all you've got is a goblet or like an elongated one, that's fine too. We're talking about improvising here, so I think that's where this chapter kind of gets. He starts relying on a lot of the things that he said in book 4, and forgetting that he was originally saying he was talking about improvising a temple here. So
right, it's just go get a mason sword down on. I think he mentions a shop in London you can buy a Masonic sword. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah, it's Crowley's style of improvising. Just borrow $100 from your countess friend and go walk on down to the Lord and Taylor. Maybe Harrods will have a nice sort of Sphinx furnace for you. Anyway, so moving on to, I actually got a lot out of the second part of this letter. I thought it kind of felt like he was talking to like really new people, which I think, if you are new to magic, there's some really good advice in here. Like as I was saying, if you're doing the LBRP, if you're doing the banishing ritual in a new space and some weird thing comes up, he even talks about that. He said, there's going to be some weird stuff that might happen to you. You're going to get attention from your neighbors, he says, on the astral plane now that you're actually practicing magic. So that's kind of the second part. He's like, well, even just trying to attain this stuff, it starts to get weird. If you go out and you're like looking for that Masonic sword, and I told you exactly where it was, and it should take you 5 minutes to get, and all of a sudden it disappears and takes you 6 weeks, that's part of the ordeal of setting up a temple. Let's see. Yeah, as soon as you start seriously to prepare a place for magic work, the world goes more cockeyed than it already is.
I think too, the general message that I got was that it is a lot of advice. There's good advice here for people who are setting out on the magical path, and for people who are maybe not sure what to expect. But a lot of the advice here felt like just keep going. It was encouraging. The one, I think at one point he references the poet James Thompson, who I had not heard of before, but I went and looked at the poem that he mentions here, the city and the city of dreadful night. And it's a long poem, but a lot of the message there, I feel like the repeating stanza at the end of that message at the end of each stanza, or most of them here, it says, "But I strode on austere, no hope, could have no fear." And it was just kind of this message of like, keep going.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of people talk about, is once you start engaging in the magical world, like weird obstacles kind of come up, or strange people come back into your life or come into your life. And to me, I always saw that as like oh, this is an ordeal, or kind of like, hindsight, like, oh, that was a weird ordeal that I just had to like accomplish this thing and move on and like not let it ruffle my feathers. And he starts to get into that a little bit when he, the more he sort of rambles, he talks about, okay, you see these weird miracles and they happen to you, and he's sort of chastising the student for having an obvious overflow of energy, that like weird astral things are attracted to you. But then he says, like, okay, so start shoring up yourself hermetically, start doing those banishing rituals and invoking rituals, and take on the shape that you won't start leaking energy and attracting weird things. Be a little bit more occult in your actions. And then he gets into a question that this person asked about sort of the contradiction of soul and sense, which I thought was really interesting. I'm not sure what the question was exactly, but it seems
Yeah.
like material and spiritual.
Yeah, I think this is one of those cases where it would be really nice to know what the letter was that prompted, or what that prompted his response here. It also mentions this letter is in response to a recent visit that they may have had with Crowley, but yeah, I think that the general question there was about spiritual versus, or the soul versus sense, I think, and which could be, we could interpret that a lot of different ways, but I think Crowley goes into kind of a description of matter versus, what the material world versus the astral world, I think, and some explanation around that, and then dives into some examples from the Book of the Law.
Well, he also, I thought it was interesting because he brings into this metaphor. So we're talking about like ordeals you have to go through to like, get further on the magical path. And he brings up like the metaphor of a river and like rapid rock, going over rocks. And he says like, oh, you think that the rocks are you and the rapids are you, but you're actually the water. And I thought that was a really beautiful sort of like metaphor for like, passing through obstacles and ordeals, being like, okay, I have to do this. And you're just, being flexible, he says, is like one of the best things you can be in order to like be successful in your magical path. We may well note that in a sense, the rage of the water seems to our perturbed imagining actually to increase and multiply the obstructions. There is a critical point beyond which the ripples fight each other. That, in short, is a picture of you. However, you've mistaken the flurry of passing over some actual snag for the snag itself. So I don't know. I thought that was just really good advice for people who were starting out, and you can't find that Masonic sword. Like Crowley said you could. Well, maybe you're gonna have to make a sword, or maybe someone will gift you a sword. But if you keep at it, you will get your equipment for your temple. And then yeah, he goes on. He sort of rages against Buddhism a little bit at the end of this letter. Rages against, I think BV is Blavatsky, I'm not sure. Just like he doesn't like the blessed nirvana, sinless, stainless peace, the desire for that. He thinks that that's kind of not really why perhaps you were incarnated for the thing that you want actual experience. And then all the quotes from the Book of the Law, to me, it seemed like he was like, no, really what you want is like to live your life and have experiences. Kind of like we've talked about in past chapters about him sort of being like, well, you just have to, cross that abyss. And once you cross the abyss, you realize all those experiences were, valuable, the bad ones and the good ones.
Right. And I think also just to find the divine aspects of all of those experiences, like, whereas the Buddhist in their pursuit for nirvana may, that's a rejection of the world, and it's a kind of a rejection of all things physical, whereas I feel like Thelema and these passages from the Book of the Law kind of explain or give examples of ways that the sense experience is the valuable part. That's where we, whether it's a good experience, a bad experience, it's our ego that tends to classify those as good or bad. But the experience itself and the sense, our sensual connection to the world is where we can find that divine connection.
Yeah, all the Book of the Law verses that he quotes are kind of all about that sort of, love, ecstasy, pure joy of existence, and experiencing Nui. And then he talks a little bit. It's funny because I don't know if you guys caught that little bit where he talks about the chapter 2, verse 2, writing that he's, "O prophet, thou hast ill will to learn this writing. I see thee hate the hand and the pen, but I am stronger." And he's like fighting Iwas. He's like, "I don't even like what I'm writing." He's writing the Book of the Law. And he comments on this. He says, "At the time, I was a hard-shelled Buddhist, and he sent out a New Year's card wishing you a speedy termination of existence." So, it's a nice little New Year's note to send out to people. It's just kind of funny that he was like fighting that sort of like, I just want to bliss out and get out of this crazy ride. And, Crowley's like, okay, now I realize how important it is to just enjoy the roller coaster. Yes, in the meantime, you can use a match, a bowl, water, a stick of incense, and a pile of salt for the elemental weapons. Yes, on your way to the Masonic sword. So yeah, it's just like whatever's at hand, that is the temple that you have. I guess maybe that's kind of tying the two parts together a little bit. But yeah, and like the more the more you read, the more he goes on about like that experience, taking joy in the experience of life. He even goes as far to say it is the hidden, unexpressed soul of Liber All, of the book, the way in which it leaps into the wild spat of rhapsody or any excuse or no excuse. This was a doctrine of joy and the language of joy. And he's like, people say I'm not serious, but this is what he's really serious about, this concept of, the intensity of life and living in it and living all of it. I think Crowley did that, when he wasn't on opium or cocaine, or maybe those enhanced. Then he has this really beautiful little metaphor about harnessing the winged horse of the sun to the plowshare of reason to show the validity of this doctrine in detail. Keith is saying, just to comment, I feel like I can agree with everything that is being talked about right now. While my magical practice is very minor, since starting down the path, I noticed a lot of anxieties in my personal life building up, but after dealing with the issue at hand, it truly does feel like the growth and the ordeal was necessary. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it's not just like, oh, I have to get this magical object. It's like everything in your life you can see is this ordeal placed in your past to make you like a better kung fu life artist.
Well, and it's sometimes the process itself is what gets you through those obstacles. It's not the obstacles themselves. It's more just like the way we approach obstacles, the way we resolve them, and that it's that path that is maybe the more important part there. And so, yeah, you do come out on the other side with a sense of not relief, maybe, but at least there's some sense of accomplishment there, I feel like.
Yeah, and also just sometimes you're going to be given, if you do enter like the AA or other magical paths, sometimes your teacher will give you assignments that you don't like, but you have to do them anyway. And there is a sense of like perseverance. It's a really important character trait to cultivate. Perdurabo was Crowley's magical name. I will endure to the end. So I always keep that in mind when I'm like, oh, really? I have to do this thing. And then, yeah, he kind of closes out the essay with, a little bit of like, oh, if you want to argue about like, one experience is as good as the other and the equanimity, he points us to another book that he wrote, 8 lectures on yoga. and kind of rails against the concept of confusing the planes. And this is something that he goes into in an essay called The Soldier and the Hunchback. Confusing the planes, he means like one thing might be appropriate in a very spiritual plane, like Kether, but not appropriate, in Malkuth, or Malkuth isn't appropriate in, Kether. Well, that's not a great metaphor, but, all things have their place in time, and to like pretend that they're like the same thing, like you wouldn't wear a boot on your head, that's dumb. It's kind of like his argument against people that want to confuse the plane. So that's what he's talking about there. And that's accessible. It's section 8 of this essay called The Soldier and the Hunchback. It's kind of posted there for you. It's a good essay. It's a good sort of how to argue like Crowley 101. Let's see. And then, the conclusion must always be doubt. See the beastly book of lies again. There's a gorgeous chapter about it. And the practical moral is this: the contradictions don't occur in Neshama. So.
And Neshama referring to the supernals at that point, yes. Like above the abyss.
Yeah, as we talked about, in the crossing the abyss, and why things are sort of crazy up there and don't make sense to us. It's because we're on a different plane, so they wouldn't. And then, he closes with some great advice, which maybe we can all take into the new year. Better still, concentrate on the next step. After all, it is the only one you can take, isn't it? Without lust of results, please.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes all you can do is just, all right, the next thing I have to do.
And the references to Rabelais, the word of the last oracle is trink. I thought that was good. Reference to wine and drinking as well.
So that's that letter. It's a little bit of a wild ride. Does anyone have anything they want to add to the discussion or questions about as we sort of wind down our Wednesday evening, New Year's Eve? Stephen has some boots on heads links. I'm not gonna click on that, Stephen. I'm sorry. I'll click on it later. Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. You know me, I like to keep these short and sweet, so probably wrap it up. This will be posted on YouTube in a few days. And next week we are going to be covering the 2 chapters of Tao. And I think it's 34 and 35. So if you want to read those ahead of time, Crowley was very into Taoism, and these are really awesome chapters. I often go back to them and think on them. Rex, did you have anything?
No, I'm looking forward to it. I was looking at those earlier too, so I think those are good choices.
Sweet. Cool. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. And have a great New Year. Stay safe. Stay sane. Stay at home.
Let's kick 2020 out the door.
Yeah. Thank you. 93.
Thank you, everyone.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Bye-bye.
93s.
Year 93s. Ta.